My son was ashamed of me because I worked as a cleaner to support him until his wedding day fell apart, and he begged me to save him. There is one memory that always comes back first when I try to explain how everything went wrong. It is not even the worst memory. It is just the one that sums up the whole mess in a single picture. Me, standing in the doorway of a fancy party room, still wearing my work pants, still smelling faintly of cleaning products, while my own son looked straight through me like I was just another member of the staff. But I did not arrive at that moment overnight, so I guess I have to start earlier. Back when I still believed that surviving together meant being on the same side. Back when I thought love could make people remember where they came from, instead of making them desperate to run from it. I married my husband when I was 24, back when I still believed that working hard automatically meant life would slowly get better. I imagined some invisible scale in the sky keeping track of every extra shift, every skipped treat, every exhausted morning, every sacrifice. I thought if I just kept putting enough weight on the side of effort, eventually the side of reward would rise. My husband had grown up in a complete mess of a home, with parents who collected failed relationships and overdue bills like they were family traditions. He used to joke that marrying me was the first grown-up choice he had ever made. I did not come from anything glamorous either. My kind of chaos was quieter and more ordinary. Low-income apartments, crowded rooms, a mother who counted every coin twice before letting herself buy anything that was not on sale. By the time we got married, I had already been working as a cleaner in office buildings for years. I walked into shiny lobbies before the sun came up and left after everyone with a badge, a title, and a desk had already gone home. My husband was waiting tables at a neighborhood restaurant, living off tips, caffeine, and the hope that things would not always be so tight. When we sat down and looked at our numbers together, they were not pretty, but they were enough to pay rent on a small place, keep groceries in the fridge, and still argue over which cheap streaming plan we could afford. When I found out I was pregnant, it was not some magical movie scene with surprise flowers and happy tears. It was me sitting on the edge of the bathtub, staring at a cheap test from the corner store, feeling my throat close and my chest open at the same time. Then it was him sitting on the bathroom floor with his head in his hands, saying very quietly that we would make it work somehow. We did not have the luxury of me staying home, not even for a little while. So I kept working through the pregnancy. I adjusted my pace, but I still scrubbed toilets, emptied trash cans, wiped sinks, and mopped floors, while my back screamed and my ankles swelled until they barely felt like mine by the end of each shift. We looked into daycare for after the baby arrived. We did the math 3 different ways. Every single time, the numbers laughed in our faces. There was no version where we paid for daycare and still ate. So we made the only decision that made sense back then. After our son was born, my husband quit his job to stay home with the baby, and I took every hour my cleaning company offered me. People like to call that kind of decision modern or progressive when it is made by couples in cute apartments with savings accounts and white furniture. But the truth is, we were just cornered by math. A few months later, I got lucky when a bigger cleaning company took over some of the buildings I already worked in and offered me a full-time contract with better pay and more predictable hours. It was not some life-changing promotion, but it meant I could stop wondering every week if I would be short on hours. Eventually, they made me a shift lead, which was just a fancy way of saying I had keys and slightly more responsibility for almost the same money. Still, that small raise felt like a miracle back then. By the time our son turned 3, we had moved from surviving month to month into a careful version of stability. The bills were paid on time, most months. We could buy fresh fruit without panic. I could pick up something small for our son at the store without needing 10 minutes of internal debate. He was a loud, curious little boy who followed my husband around the apartment like a tiny shadow. And even though part of me hated that I was not the one at home seeing all of his firsts, another part of me felt proud every time I looked at him and remembered that I was the reason the lights stayed on. My husband used to tell me in those early years that I was his hero for working so hard. I believed him. Back then, it sounded like gratitude. I did not understand that it was also foreshadowing. When our son started school, everything shifted in a slow, sneaky way that I did not notice until it had already started eating us from the inside. With our son gone for most of the day, my husband began pacing the apartment like a caged animal. He kept saying he felt useless. He felt stuck. He said it was strange to be an adult man who did not have a job title to introduce himself with. I understood him. I really did. I knew what it meant to measure your worth in paychecks and job titles, even if the title was just the woman who cleans the bathrooms. So when he said he wanted to go back to work, I agreed before he even finished the sentence. We sat down with our schedules and our bills and figured out a plan. I would move some of my hours earlier in the day or later at night, so I could be the one picking up our son from school most days. I would help with homework. I would actually attend school plays and events instead of hearing about them secondhand. For a little while, the new routine felt good. My husband came home with stories about coworkers and regular customers, with a spark in his eyes that I had not seen in a long time. And I got to do the mom things I had secretly been jealous of for years. I would show up at the school in my work clothes, still smelling faintly of disinfectant, and my son would run into my arms like he did not care how I looked or how tired I was. It filled something in me that had been empty for too long. I picked up more of the housework on weekends to make up for my husband's hours outside the home. I told myself it was temporary. Once we both found our rhythm, things would balance out again. Back then, I thought we were building something together. I did not realize he had already started looking over the fence at other lives. Eventually, he landed a job as an assistant instructor at a high-end gym across town. It was the kind of place where people pay ridiculous amounts of money to run on machines inside, while the rest of us walk everywhere because gas is expensive. He came home talking about the clients like they were characters in some glossy television show. He described their clothes, their vacations, their cars, their houses, the way they treated extra spending like it was nothing. At first, it sounded like fascination. It was as if he had been given a glimpse into a world so different from ours that it almost felt fake. But slowly, the way he talked about it changed. Our tiny apartment went from cozy to cramped. Our old car became embarrassing. And my cleaning job, which he used to brag about because it kept us afloat, became something he sighed about, like it was a temporary stage I should have grown out of already. He started saying things like, "If you pushed for that supervisor position, we could move sooner." Or, "Maybe if you picked up a couple of weekend shifts, we could finally get out of this neighborhood." He framed it like we were planning our future together. But somehow, the pressure settled squarely on my back. At the same time, he started staying out later after work. He said he had to go to social events with coworkers. He said he had to grab drinks with clients. He said that was just how networking worked in his industry. And I found myself putting our son to bed, alone, more nights than not. When our son asked where his dad was, I repeated whatever excuse I had been given and tried not to show how hollow it sounded in my own ears. I do not remember the exact moment our son stopped asking for his father at bedtime. One day, he simply accepted that it would be me reading the stories and tucking him in. That silence was its own kind of answer. I kept telling myself my husband was just in a strange phase. He was adjusting to being back in the working world. He was adjusting to a new environment where everyone seemed to own 3 houses and a boat. Eventually, I told myself, he would remember the life we had actually built, instead of obsessing over the life he thought he deserved. Looking back, I can see how naive that was. At the time, I was too busy juggling schedules and counting tips in my head to realize how much resentment was quietly replacing gratitude inside him. The night everything blew up began like 100 other nights. I was half asleep on the couch, still in my work clothes, with the television flickering in the background, while I waited to hear his key in the lock. Our son was 7 then, asleep in the bedroom with his little collection of school drawings taped to the wall. The apartment was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming. When the door finally opened, it was not just late. It was wrecked. It was like he had dragged the chaos from whatever bar he had been in straight into our front room. I smelled the alcohol before I even saw his face. When I turned around, he was swaying slightly, his eyes glassy in that particular way that means drunk, but not happy. Drunk and mean. I asked where he had been. I was not yelling. I was just tired, with that worn edge all over my voice. Instead of giving me some lazy excuse like he usually did, he laughed. It was an ugly little laugh that did not sound like him at all. Then he said he was done pretending. At first, I thought he meant he was done pretending the late nights were innocent. I thought maybe he was finally going to admit he had a problem with drinking, or that the job was getting to him. But what he actually meant crashed over me in broken sentences. He told me he wanted a divorce. He said it with this strange, rehearsed calm. Then he told me he had been seeing one of the clients from the gym for a year. A year. 12 months of me working double shifts and rearranging my life, while he was building a whole secret relationship with a woman who, as he so helpfully put it, actually understood the kind of life he wanted. She was older, he said. Around 60. Successful. She owned her own small business and some rental properties. She was charismatic and well-connected in a way he had never experienced before. He loved how important he felt standing next to her. She made him feel like he could be more than just the kid from a broken home who married the cleaner girl. He had an almost proud tone in his voice when he described her, like he was reading from a brochure. And all I could think about, standing there in my stained work shirt with my hands shaking, was that he had chosen someone who would never have to wipe crumbs off a cheap kitchen counter at midnight. Someone who already had the life he used to say we would build together. When I asked about our son, about what exactly he thought would happen to the child who had been waiting for him at that door for 7 years, he shrugged. He actually shrugged. He said he figured the boy would be better off with me. He said he was not cut out for parenting anyway. He said he did not see himself fighting for custody. The worst part was when he admitted that his grand plan with this woman did not include our son at all. Not even weekends, really. She was not looking to start over raising somebody else's kid. She wanted to travel and enjoy her money. He said it like it was a neutral fact. Like our son was an optional add-on he could simply skip. Something cracked in me at that moment. Not the soft heartbreak you feel when someone disappoints you a little. It was a deep, ugly snap. It was the realization that the person I had built my whole life around was willing to treat our child like luggage. So we got divorced. There were no dramatic courtroom scenes. No long legal battles. Just basic paperwork, a custody agreement that basically confirmed what he wanted anyway, and a judge who looked at our incomes and schedules and decided that full physical custody should be with me, with visitation rights for him if and when he felt like showing up. He was supposed to pay child support, but he treated it like a suggestion. Some months it came, other months it did not. The gifts were always louder than the responsibility. I walked out of that building technically free, just me and my son against the world. But it did not feel like freedom. It felt like walking out of a burning house with only your kid and the clothes on your back, knowing you still smelled like smoke. The next years were a blur of early mornings, late nights, and the kind of exhaustion that does not just sit in your muscles. It settles into your bones. I kept my cleaning job. I took every extra building they offered. I did everything I could to make sure my son had what he needed. I was the one up at dawn packing lunches. I was the one sitting in tiny cafeteria chairs at school meetings. I was the one learning how to fix leaky faucets from video tutorials because calling a handyman was a luxury. His father drifted in and out like a visiting celebrity. Every couple of months, he would show up with expensive sneakers, fancy gadgets, or tickets to events I barely recognized by name. It was like he had decided his role was to be the fun parent who appeared with gifts. Meanwhile, I handled every boring part of parenting that does not look good in pictures. He would pick our son up in a borrowed car or in one that clearly did not scream tight budget, then drive him off to some fancy dinner or activity. He would bring him home full of stories about how amazing everything was over there. I tried to focus on the fact that at least he was showing up sometimes. I tried to tell myself our son needed both parents in some shape or form. But it was hard not to feel the sting when my kid came home comparing their outings to our regular nights of pasta and cartoons. One year, around our son's 12th birthday, his father actually came to the small birthday gathering I planned in our cramped living room. It was just a few of his school friends, some simple food I had stayed up late cooking, and a homemade cake that leaned a little to one side. It had that familiar feeling of, we do what we can, because that had always been our reality. His father walked in, looked around with a little smirk, and in front of everyone asked if I was still cleaning toilets for a living or if I had finally found a real job. I laughed it off. What else was I supposed to do in the middle of my kid's birthday party? But inside, I felt like he had just taken a knife to every sacrifice I had ever made. After the party, my son cornered me in the kitchen and asked very seriously why I did not try to do something better if I hated my job so much. He said his dad told him I could make more money if I had more ambition. I wanted to scream that the only reason his father could stand there making jokes was because I had been working myself into the ground for years. But instead, I told him the truth. I told him it was honest work. I told him it had kept us afloat. I told him not everyone gets a career they love. I told him I had chosen stability for him over chasing dreams I could not afford. He listened, but I could see in his eyes that the damage was already done. His father had planted the idea that I was small, that I was limited by choice, not circumstance. Later that same year, there was an important event at his school, some award ceremony he had been really excited about. His father promised he would be there. My son kept checking his phone that night. He glanced at the door every time someone new walked in. I sat beside him, trying to hold my own disappointment together, while repeating that maybe traffic was bad. Maybe parking was impossible. All the usual lies we tell kids, so they do not have to feel the full weight of adult unreliability. His father never showed up. Instead, he sent a new device, something expensive, through a delivery service with a short message about being caught up with work. Watching my son open that box, trying to act happy while his eyes kept flicking toward the empty seat beside him, was one of the few times I genuinely wanted to throw a gift out the window. Not long after that, during one of our inevitable arguments, my son said he would rather live with his dad, because at least there he did not feel poor all the time. It was like being punched in the lungs. I had known for a while that the visits, the gifts, and the glamorous stories were creating a gap between us. But hearing it out loud from his mouth made me realize that the man who had walked away from us had somehow still managed to take my kid with him in another way. As my son moved into his teenage years, everything became sharper. His father officially married the wealthy woman. Suddenly, there were pictures all over social media. Them in matching outfits at nice restaurants. My son in clothes I definitely did not buy. Trips to places I had only ever seen in magazine pictures, in waiting rooms. The narrative they built was careful and polished. This woman was opening doors for him. She was giving him opportunities I could never have afforded. She was some kind of fairy godmother, stepping in where the poor, tired mother had failed. She paid for an expensive course he wanted to take. They took him on trips during school breaks. Every visit to their big house added another layer to the story he was telling himself about what a good life looked like. I kept doing what I had always done. Working, showing up, trying to be consistent. Even when I was exhausted and bitter. Even when I wanted to scream every time I saw another picture of my son smiling next to them at some place I did not even know how to pronounce. The tension between us grew like mold in a damp corner, quietly at first. Then, suddenly, everywhere. One night, during a particularly bad argument about him coming home late from their place and snapping at me over something small, he finally said it plainly. He said I held him back. He said I was trying to keep him in this tiny life because I was scared. He said if I really loved him, I would want him to move into that world, not cling to this one. I wanted to tell him that what I wanted more than anything was for him not to become the kind of man who treated people like stepping stones. I wanted to tell him that the life I was afraid of was not the one with money. It was the one where love became a performance and respect depended on status. Instead, I told him I loved him. I told him I was doing the best I could. Then I watched him roll his eyes like I had said something pathetic. Somehow, the years sped up after that. Middle school turned into high school. I watched him grow taller while feeling smaller in his eyes. Eventually, he turned 18 and announced that he wanted to become a barber. I was actually proud. He had chosen something practical and creative. Something that did not depend on his father's wife's bank account. I scraped together the money to pay for his course. I worked extra hours. I cut corners everywhere. When he graduated and started working at a shop, I stood there taking pictures with my old phone, thinking this might be the beginning of us finding each other again. That hope did not last long. Once he was earning his own money and spending more and more time at his father's house, the calls to me became shorter. The visits became fewer. Our relationship turned into something that existed mostly through quick text messages and occasional holiday dinners where he seemed restless and half-present. I was still technically his mother, but more and more, I felt like an old teacher, someone he had once been close to in a chapter he had already closed. By the time he turned 24, he was engaged to a woman I barely knew. He and his partner had been dating for a while, but I had met her only twice in passing. Both times were at events organized by his father or the other side of the family, where I felt like a guest of a guest, someone who had received an invitation by mistake. When they announced the engagement, it came through a group message that included me, along with a bunch of people I had never met. The photo was taken at some scenic place during a trip I had not even heard about. Wedding planning kicked into full gear, and I watched it happen mostly from the outside. I was not involved in choosing the venue. I was not involved in the dress, the colors, or any of the things you imagine a mother might help with. I did not expect to pick out centerpieces or control anything, but I thought maybe I would at least be asked about the music, or where I would like to sit. Instead, I found out through an offhand comment from a relative that the seating chart had me tucked at a side table with distant cousins, nowhere near the front rows reserved for immediate family. When I asked my son about it, he said, "Oh, we just thought it would be easier this way. Less drama." As if my feelings were a scheduling problem, as if they were not something that mattered. He also told me not to get there too early on the day of the wedding, because they did not want people hovering around while they were getting ready. That stung more than I wanted to admit. Then came the part that broke something I did not even know was still intact. One afternoon, we were talking about the reception, and I casually asked if he had thought about the mother-son dance. He looked uncomfortable. He said he had been thinking of skipping that tradition altogether because it felt outdated, and he did not want anything too sentimental. I swallowed my disappointment. I told him it was his day and his choice. I tried to convince myself that maybe it was better. Maybe I did not really want to stand in front of everyone, swaying awkwardly while they judged my dress. A few days later, I was at a small gathering where his fiancée was talking to one of her friends. They were excitedly going over the playlist for the reception. The friend mentioned how sweet the mother-son dance was going to be. And his fiancée, without thinking, said, "I know." And he picked the perfect song for his dance with his stepmom. "She's going to cry for sure." I froze. I am not proud of what I did next. I did not confront anyone right there. I quietly slipped outside, waited until I was alone, and texted my son one simple question. Who exactly was he planning to dance with? At first, he tried to deny it. He got defensive. He said I was misunderstanding things. He said people were gossiping. But when I told him exactly what I had heard, he finally admitted it. He had chosen to do the special dance with his stepmother. He said she had been there for him in his most important years. He said she had helped him with opportunities. He said she made him feel comfortable in the circles he moved in now. He said he did not want to make things weird by ignoring her in front of everyone. Then he added some line about how our relationship was private and complicated, and he did not want to put that on display. I cannot fully describe what that felt like. It was not just jealousy. It was not just hurt pride. It was a deep, cold humiliation. It felt like he had taken every sacrifice I had ever made and quietly handed the credit to someone else in front of an audience. I told him as calmly as I could, with my hand shaking, that it hurt me deeply. I told him it felt like being erased. He responded by saying I was making it all about me on his day. That night, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and replaying every moment from his childhood. All the nights I carried him when he had a fever. All the mornings I left before dawn to keep us afloat. All the times I swallowed my own exhaustion so he would not have to feel it. And I realized I could not force myself to sit in that room and watch him publicly replace me. So I decided I was not going to the wedding. It was not a dramatic rage decision. It was a slow, painful conclusion that kept coming back no matter how many times I tried to talk myself out of it. When I told him, he reacted exactly the way I knew he would. He accused me of being selfish. He said I would ruin his day. He said people would talk. He said I was proving everyone right about me being difficult. His fiancée called me separately, trying to mediate. She said she understood I was hurt, but that my absence would devastate him. I told her the truth, too. I told her I had been devastated for years. For once, I had to choose myself. On the night before the wedding, I turned my phone off for a few hours because I knew there would be calls and messages trying to wear me down. I was afraid that if I heard his voice while he was in full panic mode, I would cave like I always had. I turned it back on in the morning. There were messages waiting. But what really hit was the call that came through right as I was trying to decide if I should shower or just stay in my pajamas all day and pretend the event did not exist. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered without thinking. At first, all I could hear was frantic breathing and noise in the background. It was my son, calling from someone else's phone. He was in a full meltdown. He was crying so hard he could barely get the words out, but I pieced them together. His father had shown up to the venue drunk, not slightly buzzed. Completely gone. He was causing a scene with the bride's parents. He was hitting on people. He was saying inappropriate things. The bride's parents cared a lot about appearances and reputation, and they were furious. The whole situation was spiraling. My son kept saying I needed to come. He said I was the only one who could calm his father down. He said I had to fix it before everything was ruined. For a second, I almost grabbed my keys. Instinct kicked in. That old muscle memory of rushing in to clean up other people's messes, of sacrificing my safety, my dignity, and my feelings just to keep things from falling apart. Then I remembered the dance. The seat at the back. The years of being treated like an embarrassment. And I heard myself say something I had never said to him before. I could not help him. I told him I was sorry things were a mess. I told him it sounded awful. But I was not his emergency contact anymore. He begged. His voice cracked. He said I was still his mother. He said I could not just sit at home while his life exploded. And I reminded him very quietly that when he planned the event, he had made it clear who he wanted in the front row and who he did not. He tried to say it was not the same thing. He said this was different. He said he needed me. I could feel my resolve wobbling. Then he said that if I really loved him, I would put my pride aside. That was it. Pride is such a convenient word people use, when what they really mean is the bare minimum of self-respect. In that moment, I realized that for him, me having boundaries did not fit into his idea of what a mother was supposed to be. I told him I loved him. I told him I always had. But I had spent his entire life setting myself on fire to keep everyone else warm. I was done being the designated extinguisher for problems I did not create. Then I hung up. I broke down after that. I sobbed in the hallway like I had just watched him get hurt physically, not emotionally. My hands were shaking so badly that I had to sit on the floor just to breathe. The guilt came in waves. Maybe I should have gone just this once. Maybe it would have been the thing that finally brought us back together. Maybe I was being cruel. But underneath all of that, there was a calmer voice. A voice I was not used to hearing. It kept reminding me that every time I had rescued his father in the past, nobody had thanked me, and nothing had ever changed. I did not answer when the same number called again, 15 minutes later. Eventually, the calls stopped. I did not find out exactly what happened at the venue until days later, after the dust had settled and people started talking. A friend of a friend who had been there filled me in. The story sounded like watching a slow-motion car crash. My son's father had arrived at the wedding already drunk enough to stumble. He was wearing a suit that did not quite fit right. He was loud and overly friendly in that way that makes everyone uncomfortable. He started hitting on the bride's mother. He made comments about how good she looked for her age. He touched her arm. He did not take the hint when she tried to pull away. The bride's parents were horrified. They took everything about this wedding personally, and this was not the polished family image they had expected. As if that was not enough, when my son's stepmother tried to pull him aside and calm him down, he started loudly airing out their dirty laundry in front of anyone who happened to be standing nearby. He accused her of cheating on him. He accused her of only being with him because she wanted someone to show off. He accused her of using her money to control everyone. He shouted about things that had clearly been festering for years. He said she had never wanted him involved with his old life. And by old life, he meant me and our son. He said she had made him feel like a guest in his own house. Guests began quietly moving toward the exits while pretending not to stare. At some point, he lost his balance and fell into a row of chairs, knocking them over like dominoes, while the wedding planner desperately tried to keep everything together. The bride's parents finally had enough. They told their daughter they were not going to stand there and pretend this was normal. They said they would not be part of a union with a family that brought that kind of chaos into such an important day. They walked out. A decent portion of their side of the guest list followed them. The officiant refused to proceed. The venue manager called security. The ceremony was officially shut down before anyone could walk down the aisle. The wedding never actually happened. There were no vows, no dance, no cake cutting, just shouting, crying, and people trying to leave without getting dragged into the mess. A few days later, my son sent me a long email. It was one of those messages where someone tries to do everything at once. Apologize, explain, justify, blame. He wrote about how embarrassed he was, how furious he was with his father, how heartbroken he felt about his fiancé's parents pulling the plug. But he also made sure to slip in a line about how if I had been there, I might have been able to stop it. He did not write, "This is your fault." Not directly, but the implication was there, hanging between the sentences. I stared at that email for a long time. Then I closed it without replying. I realized that if I responded, I would probably fall back into one of my usual roles. The comforter, the explainer, the peacekeeper. I would say something reassuring about how what happened was not his fault. I would tell him maybe things could still be fixed. And by doing that, I would take responsibility again for a disaster I had not created. So I did something new. Nothing. I let his words sit in his inbox. I stayed silent. It felt unnatural. It felt wrong even. But it also felt strangely calm, like sitting completely still after running for years. The months after the canceled wedding were rough. I did not suddenly become some glowing example of self-care just because I had started ignoring emails. There were days when I barely got out of bed. Days when the quiet in my apartment felt like punishment instead of peace. Days when I replayed every choice I had ever made as a mother and wondered where exactly I had lost him. I questioned my decision about the wedding 1,000 times. Could I have prevented the whole disaster just by showing up and babysitting my ex one last time? Would my son still be engaged? Would he still think of that day as a happy memory instead of a nightmare? Then, slowly, life started sneaking back in through the cracks. One of my neighbors, a woman who had nodded hello to me in the hallway for years, even though we had never really talked, knocked on my door one afternoon with a bag full of yarn. She said she was dragging me to a little community craft group she went to every week. I tried to say no. I told her I was tired. I told her I was not crafty. I told her I had too much to do. She refused to leave until I agreed. I showed up at that group, expecting to feel awkward and out of place. Instead, there was a strange warmth in the room. It was a mix of women of different ages, talking over each other while their hands moved automatically. Knitting, crocheting, beading, whatever people happened to be working on. At first, I just sat there pretending to care about the scarf I was half-heartedly trying to make. But week after week, I kept going. Without realizing it, I started telling them bits and pieces of my life. Not the whole saga at once, just little stories. A comment my ex had made, something my son had posted on social media, how the wedding had collapsed. They did not judge me. They did not try to fix me with fake wisdom. They just listened. Sometimes, they made jokes at the expense of the men involved, which was exactly the kind of therapy I needed. Little by little, those evenings became something I actually looked forward to. They gave me a break from the loop in my head. One of those women convinced me to try a dating app. I laughed in her face at first. I told her I was too old, too tired, too messed up. I told her I had no interest in going on awkward coffee dates with strangers. She rolled her eyes and said, nobody was asking me to marry anyone. She said I only had to have conversations that were not about cleaning supplies or past trauma. We sat on my couch one afternoon, and she helped me set up a profile. She chose pictures that did not make me look like I was about to clock into work. She helped me write a bio that was honest but not depressing. I remember feeling ridiculous, like I was trespassing in a space meant for younger, shinier people. At the same time, there was a tiny spark of curiosity. I matched with a few men who went nowhere. Conversations died after 2 messages. Some turned into boring small talk about the weather and favorite shows. Then I matched with someone who, on paper, did not look like anything special. He was divorced. He had a regular maintenance job in a building. He liked cooking. He had a grown child he was not very close to. We started talking. Something about the way he asked questions made me feel strangely comfortable. He actually listened. He did not rush to prove anything. We messaged back and forth for weeks before I agreed to meet him in person, because part of me was still convinced he would turn out to be a serial liar or someone with a secret family. Our first meeting was supposed to be quick. Just a drink at a quiet place not far from my apartment. But it turned into hours of conversation. We traded stories. Some were funny. Some were painful. He did not flinch when I told him about my ex, my son, and the wedding. He did not try to play therapist. He did not insult my son. He did not act like he was a hero for simply listening. He just nodded, asked follow-up questions, and at one point, when I apologized for rambling, he laughed and said, "You know, you are allowed to take up space, right?" I went home that night, feeling lighter than I had in a long time. We kept seeing each other. There were no grand gestures. No whirlwind romance montage. Just a slow, steady building of trust. He showed up when he said he would. He texted when he was going to be late. He never made jokes about my job. He did not treat my past like baggage he had to tolerate. But he also did not use it as an excuse to put me on a pedestal. It was normal. And after the emotional roller coaster I had gotten used to, normal felt almost exotic. Months went by. Without really making one big decision, he slowly became part of my daily life. Meanwhile, I heard bits and pieces about my son through other people. The engagement was officially over. His ex-fiancée had moved on. Her parents had cut off all contact with his family. My son had moved back in, at least temporarily, with his father and stepmother. Then came rumors that the relationship between his father and that woman was crumbling too. The drunken incident at the wedding had ripped open things they had both been pretending were fine. I did not feel joy about it exactly. It was more like a numb confirmation that the shiny, perfect life my ex had chased had rust underneath. Just like everything else, my son sent a couple more emails over the next year. They had fewer apologies and more analysis, like he was trying to build a case in his own defense. He wrote about how hard it had been growing up between two very different worlds. He wrote about how confusing it was to have one parent who could barely pay the bills and another who made money appear like magic. He wrote about the pressure he had felt to pick a side, to prove he was not ungrateful to the one who paid for courses and trips. And between all of that, there were little jabs. Suggestions that if I had made more money, if I had been less tired, if I had tried harder to fit into their world, things would have been different. None of those messages contained the words, "I am sorry," in a simple, clear way. So I kept not answering. I do not know exactly when 5 years slipped by. Suddenly, I was looking at a calendar and realizing that the anniversary of the non-wedding had come and gone multiple times. By then, the man I had met through the app was no longer just someone I was dating. He was my partner, my constant. We had moved in together into a slightly bigger place. It was still not fancy, but it felt like home. Mismatched furniture we had both collected over the years. A kitchen where we actually cooked together instead of eating over the sink. We talked about everything. We fought sometimes in regular human ways. We made up without anyone threatening to leave the country in a fit of drama. When he asked me to marry him, it was not an elaborate surprise. It was a conversation at our kitchen table after dinner. He said he could not imagine growing old with anyone else. Then he asked if I felt the same. I did. Our wedding was small. We held it in a modest community center room decorated by our friends from the craft group. There was no strict dress code, no seating chart, no special dance built around anyone's ego. I did not invite my ex-husband. Obviously, I did not invite my son either. Part of me hesitated. I wondered if that would finally close a door that maybe could still be cracked open. But the truth was, that door had been closing from his side for years. I had heard through mutual contacts that my son had eventually married someone else. She was a woman from a regular background. Not rich. Not obsessed with appearances. Just normal. They had a small ceremony, nothing like the production the first one was supposed to be. He had not invited me. I found out after the fact. This time, the knowledge did not stab me the same way. It hurt, of course, but it felt more like a dull ache. The kind you get from old injuries when the weather changes. I imagined him standing there saying vows again. I hoped, in a distant way, that he would treat this woman better than he had treated me. Better than he had allowed himself to treat me. Every now and then, someone mentions him in passing, or they show me a recent picture they saw online. I still feel that brief freeze inside, like my body has to process his name before my mind does. I do not hate him. That would be too simple. What I feel is a complicated mix of love, loss, regret, anger, and acceptance that does not have a clean label. The same goes for my son. He is still out there living his life, cutting hair, paying bills, posting pictures with his new wife and their friends. He has my number. My email has not changed. If he ever wants to have a real conversation, one that does not involve assigning me a role in his personal drama, I am here. I just will not be the one chasing anymore. As for my ex-husband, last I heard, he and the rich woman finally split for good. Apparently, all the things he used to brag about, her money, her connections, her elegant circle, came with conditions he could not always meet. When he lost his charm or embarrassed her too publicly, the support dried up. He went from being the shiny project to the headache she did not want to deal with. The irony of him ending up alone after abandoning the family he had built with me is not lost on me. But instead of enjoying it, I mostly feel tired. He was the first person I ever thought of as home. Now he is just someone whose name makes me check that my emotional locks are still secure. I still clean offices for a living. People sometimes assume that after everything that happened, I must have gone back to school, or changed careers, or found some new calling. But the truth is, I did not. I got better contracts, sure. I shifted to buildings that pay a little more, and treat the staff with slightly more respect. But I am still the woman pushing the cart down the hallway. I am still the woman wiping fingerprints off glass doors so other people can walk into shiny lobbies and feel important. For a long time, I was ashamed of that. I thought my worth depended on how far I could get from the version of me who scrubbed bathrooms for a paycheck. Now, when I put on my uniform, I still sometimes feel that old sting when someone looks right through me. But it is not as sharp anymore. I know what this job has paid for. A roof. Food. The chance for my son to take a course. The little savings account I share with my new husband for emergencies. I know the strength it took to keep clocking in when my heart was broken, when my body hurt, when my own child looked at me like I was small. I do not need anyone else to understand that for it to be real. Sometimes, late at night, when my new husband is asleep and the apartment is quiet, except for the distant sound of traffic, I catch myself thinking about that canceled wedding, not because I wish I had been there, but because that was the day I finally realized I was allowed to stop begging people to see me. I was allowed to sit one out, even if it made other people uncomfortable. I was allowed to let someone else's disaster unfold, without jumping in as the unpaid cleanup crew. If you are waiting for some neat ending where my son shows up at my door in tears, and we hug, and everything is healed, I am sorry. That is not how real life works. At least, not mine. Maybe one day we will talk. Maybe we will never see each other again. Both possibilities hurt in different ways, but neither one defines me anymore. For the first time since I was 24 and holding a positive pregnancy test with shaking hands, my life is not built around what he or his father chooses to do. My life is built around quieter things now. The way my new husband laughs at his own bad jokes. The way my craft group friends always bring too much food. The way clean floors shine under fluorescent lights at 3:00 the morning when nobody else is around. None of it is glamorous. None of it would make a good commercial. But it is mine. And if that makes me small in some people's eyes, then maybe small is better than invisible. Because at least I can see myself clearly here, and I am finally done apologizing for the space I take up.